So this is a little walkthrough of the shelter belt system and its basic layout and design, because we're in a very windy place. We're on a north facing slope, and yeah, there's various factors to be worked in there. So yeah, have a little look, you might find it interesting. So this is my visual aid. So we're standing down here on this corner. It's basically laid out in a vaguely squarish diamond with that point heading south. So we've got the house, the barn and the neighbour's barn, but where we're down here on the edge, this edge here is this one going away from us here, and this edge here is this one here. So here's where we're going to put the larger trees, obviously, because we haven't got to worry about shade behind them. But along this edge here, bordering the track coming in, we've got the phone line coming in. So as well as the eventual species mix that we got coming through, which is, we'll have a look at that in a minute, we're also going to be putting in a fairly dense planting of hazel, so that we can use that obviously for, you know, nuts, poles and so on, all the usual stuff. But also we're going to be putting through chestnut, because it's a full height tree, but it'll coppice really well. So we can take it for poles when it gets too big, because if the trees get big enough that they threaten the cable, we haven't got to worry about causing a problem with that. We can just coppice them and the trees will come back, or pollard them for that matter, without, you know, causing any problem for the phone line. But if at any point the phone line becomes completely redundant, because it, you know, that could be a possibility, that we just come off the landline completely, at which point we could just ignore the trees, not pollard them, and let them go, you know, to full height, and we've got full height chestnut trees that'll give us nuts. So it's a little bit of future proofing just by design. Now on the other side of that fence, this is our corner of our land here, so we're just inside that. So as we come up here, you can see this is what used to be a really old hedgerow, which would originally have been the hawthorn that's here now, but there'd also have been beech as well, but the beech has died out over time. In the more maintained hedgerows that elsewhere in the area, you can see where the beech is still in. They're really nice hedgerows, but of course this is just turned into shrubby trees at this point. So we've planted on the outside, and this is council maintained road, but the council have given us the okay to go ahead and do this. It's very windy, but you can see we started planting in some young ones so that they'll come up, and as these die off, at least they'll replace it with something. So we've done that down here, because obviously this is, you know, down below the bit that's opposite the croft. But as we come up higher up, oh yeah, this is interesting. These raspberries just turned up. We didn't plant them, but you know, we'll make use of them as they spread. See, we've got a little bit of willow starting to creep in, just to make it a bit more diverse. There's another willow, and I see there we put a hawthorn in, because these are fairly old trees, just so as these start to die off, they'll come up. And there's a willow as well, so at least one of them will take. So you can see here we're up and we're opposite our level of croft. So at this point, anything that grows is, you know, bonus. Gives us a bit more protection from that side, so we'll have protection from the track, but also an outer skin to protect the inner stuff. So we can get away with a narrower nurse species belt here, hopefully. But you can see, there we go, there's the hawthorn. There's quite a few, and also a load of willow planted through there as well. And this is an interesting one. This is the our septic tank, which is in this corner of the field here. That creates its own challenges, we'll come to that in a minute. Has a pipe running underneath the track, and it spills out here and then runs down this ditch, and at the bottom of that ditch is the road, and if you cross the road and carry on down the other track, beyond that is Loch Watton. Well, yeah, anyway, it's how, you know, it's not a massive problem because it's one household, it's very small, and obviously, you know, there's no nutrient getting in to the loch from us, but still, to try and take that up as best we can, we've planted in the ditch watercress. So you can see that's what's coming through here. Where are we? Can't really see my finger. There we go. So you can see that's what's coming through, and later in the year it comes out nice, really nice white flowers and that. It's already, you know, nice bit of diversity. Now obviously you wouldn't eat from stuff that's come out of the septic ditch. But what we could do is harvest seed from that for planting elsewhere if we wanted it elsewhere. It's a little bit of resiliency to have it somewhere else on the croft. We've already got it planted in a few places. And you see there's more hawthorn coming through. So as we come further up till we're opposite the house, now we're hitting the stage where the pipe runs through. So the other side of that fence, I can't really put any large trees because obviously those roots could go down, they could compromise the septic tank and all the plumbing that feeds into it. I'm just not risking that. It's an old system and I don't want to mess with it. So what we're going to do instead is this corner here, we're going to embrace the fact that it's going to be slightly windy, and at some point I'm going to have a very small domestic wind turbine, and that we'll put here, so that because where them cable drums are behind the building there's going to be a trackway coming through there, and of course because we've got a trackway coming through here, so this corner remaining exposed will have a bit of a wind tunnel. So we'll make the most of that and we'll put something there that we can actually make use of, seeing as I can't actually put anything over it because obviously it's over the septic. But opposite it we have got more trees coming through. I mean, you can see just, yeah, here we go. Here's one that we planted 2 years ago. So you can see how these are coming along the hawthorn. So that's looking really well. And we got that as a bare root tree and put it in. It's had no protection, it's had no fertilizer, it's just, you know, doing its thing. And then we've come through more recently and put in a load of elder. There's another hawthorn. It's not as big as the other one, but it's looking pretty well. But yeah, a lot of elder. And further up, again, you can see elder, hawthorn, a lot of elder. Hawthorn, elder, you know, whole big row, quite densely planted, and it's mostly gone in as a nurse crop. That'll be taken out eventually because what's coming through just seems to do okay here. These have just been transplanted across. Is Elaeagnus ebingi. That's a fairly small plant. It was a much bigger plant. We took a load of cuttings off it last year, so the root mass is actually bigger than this, so it'll bounce back quick. You can just see that the new shoots are just starting to come through on it there. And from here we've got one every about 1.5 meters, 2 meters between here up to that gate, and that's where the council road ends. So beyond that, obviously we haven't planted much because that is not ours, that belongs to a neighbour. But the idea being that these Elaeagnus, as they come up, being an evergreen species, it'll come up to about 4 meters high, it'll fill out into a hedge. Some people seem to find them struggling here, but we seem to have so far got away with it because that is opposite the front of the house, and that has its own little plantings inside it which are going to come up yet. See, the crab apple's looking really nice this time of year. Yeah, we've pollarded the 2 trees that are too close to the house really, but I didn't want to cut them down because it's really good protection. So I've just pollarded them last year, so this year they're going to come back as, you know, big green pom-poms and give us a huge amount of protection. And we've got a few fruit varieties and so on in the front garden. I'll do another video on that. This is about the shelter belt. So all the Elaeagnus plantings along here, especially with the other plant trees that are in as a nurse crop. So here, for example, we've got what is that? It's a dog rose. We've got quite a few of them in various places. And you can see here's the ebbings coming through behind. See, it looks a bit ratty. That's last year's growth. This is the new stuff just coming through on the top, and that'll come up to about here this year probably. And as they fill out, they should fill the space and give us a huge amount of protection, because here we're opposite. See where the car park's going to go. Now there will eventually be, the garage will be replaced and there'll be a fence line continuing further up to protect the gardens behind it and the raised beds and so on. But still, it's going to be a potential weak spot because, of course, having an entrance here, we can't just put plantings across there because, you know, cars need to come through. So having this outer skin that's really quite dense will really make a big difference for blocking that wind. And also the Elaeagnus ebingi is just the understory really. Everything else that's in here is kind of a nurse crop, although, you know, we might leave the odd thing in. but that's just there to give a bit of protection to get at what we actually want, which will be an overstory of a couple of full height apple trees. Just because again, it's win-win. We can go for a full height tree here, it's not going to cause any problem, and the council have said they don't mind us putting hedgerow trees back in, so as long as we don't take the mick, it's all good. So look at this next section. So you can see up through here we've got a double row of Italian alder. They're doing amazingly well, and the double row extends as far as the edge of the car park, or what will be the car park, and this here is a single row. Now this row used to extend right down to that gate post there, but you know, clipped a couple with a digger and one with a trailer, and one thing leads to another, and now the row ends here. This is the last one, but you know, let's get out the sun. There we go. But yeah, they're looking really well. They're flying up. You can see these started going in 2 years ago. We've had a few deaths and we've replaced them, but most of them are still the original 2-year-old trees. And you can see that's quite a line running through here now. That's, yeah, the best bit of the shelter belt really. This area here, we're not going to add any more. We're going to put a couple of trees in here that'll be productive ones, that so that as you come up the drive, well, come up the track and go to swing into the car park, you got something, you know, pretty to see, because the other side of the car park there'll be a windbreaking fence in here eventually anyway. So yeah. Now inside that row of the Italian alder, which is, you know, nitrogen fixing, and it will be a, you know, a full height tree, so that'll feed fertility to the rest of the system. We've got a fairly diverse planting of food forest species coming through here. I've done a whole video on that, so I'm not going to focus on that now. But the outer skin of it, you see the red willows just starting to come into leaf quite nicely. That's going to be, that post is higher than it will be. That's going to be hammered in further, and that will follow a line all the way around the track. And you can see I've manured it heavily because, yeah, Willow loves it. So this will really come up this year up to about this height. It'll all get woven together, and that'll give us a willow veg that we can harvest every year for stick fuel or cuttings or whatever. So it's a feature like the inner edge of the shelter belt, but it's also starting to edge into the food forest, more productive spaces, whereas further down the section, the other side of the house, but still in the same orientation alongside the track there, that's going to be edging more towards species for poultry fodder, because that's going to be the poultry fodder system. So as we carry on up, there's no point doing every little bit, so we'll skip now up to past the swales, up to the very top section which runs along the southern edge. So I'm along the southern edge of the property now, on a handy dandy guide. We're standing in this corner looking in this direction here. So we're at the highest spot in the landscape here, and all the land drops away in a very slight slope to the north. Now the main issue here is because the land slopes away to the north, anything we plant here, when the sun is low in winter and passing in an arc from over there to pretty much just over here, so it's a fairly narrow arc, and will cast a shade across the entire croft from here. So even deciduous species that drop their leaves, because there's so many rows of trees potentially between here and the house, even in winter that can cast quite a bit of shade. There's 3 swales between the horizon and the house for a start. Now the bottom of these 3 swales in the top field is going to be willow that's going to be harvested every year anyway, so that's not an issue, but everything above that needs to be either low or something that's coppiced regularly. So we're going for soft fruit species, as well as nuts that'll coppice well, like hazel and dwarf trees. And there's a huge amount of variety there, it's really not a problem. But just because there's just so much planting between the top of the field and where the house is, we just need that limit. Otherwise we're just going to spend our lives in the shade. So this section here that looks slightly mounded, that's an old roadway, so I'm fairly limited with what I can plant in there, but I've got a plan for that further along. But inside that we've got a shelter belt skin of, the main core of it is a row of hazels, but around that we've got a nurse crop of elder and willow and various pine that have, well, the first two went in as cuttings, the pine went in as trees in the winter. And pine here tend to suffer for the first year, and then they seem to come on quite strong, or die, but most of them come on quite strong. But the first year they look shocking. Now what I'm walking down here is basically an old drainage ditch. That needs digging out because I want to drain it again, because I've got, as I say, got plans for this old roadway. Not going to use it as a track, it doesn't go anywhere, but I'm going to take advantage of the fact that it's slightly drier land, especially with the drainage ditch. It will drain this land quite nicely, because we're basically up on the ridge here. There's nothing feeding into us from above, it's just water that drops out of the sky, so it's fairly easy to keep it dry. So we've got also an understory of various currents coming through. But other than the hazel, this is mostly a nurse crop, a nurse species that will eventually get culled out. On the inside of it, between where the trees end and the track begins, we've got a nice bit of edge there. So that's where the dwarf fruit species will begin, the fruit trees and so on. And there'll be proper polyculturally grown ones. You know, it's not going to be a conventional orchard, but there'll be a row of them. And then they'll be slightly more densely planted between the pods. And there's another pod coming in here soon, and again the same there, but with a central core of autumn olive, which is nitrogen fixing, very hardy, will provide a nice bit of shelter between the pods, and that should create a nice microclimate in this area here, even though it's quite up here, quite exposed at the top of the ridge. And also the interesting thing about the autumn olive is it does drop its leaves, but only for a couple of months, right in the middle of winter, when the sun's at its lowest, and we want to get as much possible of it through to heat up the passive solar systems that we're going to be installing on the house. So yeah, even the design of the plantings up here are all designed for solar access further down the line as we go through succession. And the higher story trees up here, we can get away with the odd one, because a deciduous tree doesn't cast much shade in winter, but we're very much limiting it, and most of the others will either get pruned or coppiced or culled. But this does need to be quite a dense planting. It just needs to be kept fairly low, just so we don't cast too much shade in winter. But about halfway along this section here, now when I said, wow, that's got really hot as soon as I'm behind that gorse, that goes to show effective microclimate. You can see here, I mean, these were just sticks that went in, and about 40–50% of them will take. So if you're chopping out hedgerow trees anyway, you might as well make the most of it. But about halfway along, we put this in. Now, it occurred to me that that is an amazing view, and there's a gap in the gorse from there to there. So what we've done is we've planted a red willow half circle that comes around and around to here. It's got a little flick that comes around here, and it's got wings that go off either side and tie it into the gorse. And as this comes up and becomes bigger, we'll weave it together, and eventually we'll form it into a fairly low dome at about 2.5–3 meters high. So it's easy, we can harvest all the shoots off it, but inside it there'll be a nice protected space that is open with that really nice view to the south. So it's even in midsummer, it should be a nice sunny space that you can come and sit, but you're not going to get fried. You know, you're going to get a nice bit of shelter, and I'm going to put a nice bench in here. So you can see here, and this has been in just over a year, so this is just its second year, just beginning now. So you can see the willow dome going around, and that little gap there, it's got the little flick around it just so there's no wind can come in from the side, so we're nicely protected. So yeah, just a nice little spot. Oops, dropped my cheat sheet. Nice little spot that you will be able to sit, and that'll be the view, and you get that huge horizon. And from there you can see where, hang on, where are we? That little building site there, that's where the composting toilet and shower unit's going to go, and then this drainage along here will feed into the top little earthwork pond there, and that pretty much is where this shelter belt finishes. So I'll just walk along to there and then we'll pick it up from there. So I'm pretty much exactly at the southernmost tip of the croft now. So that way is directly north. Over here, that's the Willow Dome that we just looked at. So this is, so that is the southwestern edge, and this is the southeastern edge. So we're going a little walk down here now, but it's a good spot for seeing the context, because that edge down there is where we've got the very tall species with the Italian alder, and then the small food forest with the willow fedge around the front of it, the red willow fedge. And then there's the car park, the house and the zone 1 systems, and then the other side of that is the lower field where we started out, and that is where we've got the poultry forest. So you can see again, quite large species towards the back end of that, so you can start seeing the outer skin just creating a large cup around the house and the zone 1 systems, with that right at its point, right at the apex of that shape. So it'll be a really nice protected spot in winter with maximum solar access. Right, let's have a little walk down here. So down this edge you can see we've got an outer row of hybrid willow. This is Bowles hybrid. It's one of the high yielding cultivars. It's done okay. Interestingly though, it hasn't done amazingly well out here on the edge of the field, but I'm confident it will in time and become a good coppice plant. Because where we've grown this on the Swales, it's just put on 2.5 meters every year, whereas this here is up to about 1.5 meters here, and this is in its 3rd year. It's just not done as well out here, but this is very exposed. It's very high up, there's not much protection, and this is what's done the best. As we go further down the row, you'll see, they've barely done a thing, which brings me to my next point. We've changed the way that we do shelter belt, starting top corner, because obviously we've got the pods and that side of that business going in. We want to give that as much protection as we can, so that it's just a bit more protected in winter. So what we've done this year is we've overplanted with all of the willow. So anytime anyone's been culling, we've taken it as cuttings. I found a load of it. Here, go look at this one. I think this is the actual cultivar. See all the look at all the budding on it. And this was shoved in as a bare stick this winter. I found a load of it in a lay-by where they'd cut down a tree into nice 2-foot long sections and a load of brash and just chucked the whole lot over the hedge. Well, I had that. Yeah, it's nice to leave piles of stuff for wildlife, but this lot of willow clearly wanted to be a forest, so it came home with me, and it's done really well. And there's 3 or 4 different types down here, and you can see how closely planted it is. Most of what you're looking at is willow. There's some stuff that's obviously the trees that are going to be here once the willow's been taken out eventually. There's a nice bit of rowan. We've got a lot of currants through here. We've got, I think that's a bird cherry. We've got quite a bit of bird cherry. There's crab apple, there's various pines, there's cherry plum. We've got, here we go, there's a crab apple there, and that is a currant of some sort. Again, it's one of those things, we've taken cuttings from the one that's got them and shoved them in all over the place. So we're not exactly sure what's what in the shelter belt, but there's lots of everything. And you can see the density and how it's just starting to come up this year. But the willow is really flying up. Very pleased with it. Considering, as I say, there's other stuff I found in a lay-by. Yeah, they're doing well. So we've got like a 3-foot wide skin of that in as a nurse crop with the Bowles hybrid on the outside of it now. And once the Bowles hybrid has had a second row put inside of it and it's all doing well, at that point we'll probably start taking out some of this willow and coppicing and cutting it down, because yeah, you can't have too much, at least not initially, because we're going to be doing a lot with rocket mass systems in the next couple of years. So yeah, the more stick fields that we've got, the better. But beyond a certain point, these will go to be full height trees. And so if that's south behind me, you can see we're directly in line with the house. So if we had too high a canopy here, it'd cast a lot of shade, and we don't want that. But just to get up the nice sparse full height deciduous canopy that there will be here, with a lower down evergreen canopy that'll give us year-round protection in you know, even in winter we'll have a proper break from that wind. So nice, pretty pleasant day today, but yeah, you can get the odd really windy spell. So yeah, that's what will eventually be here, but this is mostly here just as a nurse crop. That rowan looks nice. Look at that, beautiful. And so on down the system. And this section's pretty similar. Oh, hang on. It's that small leaf lime. Linden tree. That's nice. I forgot that was there. So there's the odd random tree in amongst them that's going to be there even after the nurse crop's taken out. Let's see, what else is there? There's crabapple, there's cherry plum, there is rowan, quite a bit of rowan. A few types of willow in addition to the ones that are in as a nurse crop. There's some hazel. There's some cornelian cherry. I'm really upsetting oyster catcher. And they weren't here last year. I mean, they do nest in open fields, so I can't say it's because of the croft going through transition that's caused them to come. What we got here? One that I missed when I was putting the guards out this winter. So it might still yet come. That is that's a honey locust. It leaves out quite late. Doesn't quite feel like a twig. Feels okay lower down, but they get chewed on quite badly unless they got guards on. I got most of them. That's one I must have missed. So I wonder where their nest is, because I've not seen it. Now as we come down towards this corner, we haven't got to worry so much about shade in winter, because that fence line there is the northeastern perimeter, so we can go for full height trees again there. So we've got chestnut, we've got various kinds of apple on their own roots. Discovery, I think, mostly. We've got a load of cuttings that we put in, and some of them seem to have taken. Here we've got that's a red oak, I believe. And yeah, and there's currants in everywhere, because even when the bigger trees have come up, the shade shouldn't do them any harm. They'll still continue to crop fairly well. We've got elder down here, of course, because that's everywhere. That's another bird cherry, that one. And then we start coming into more conventional hedgerow species as well. So this is blackthorn. So we'll have slow production, and of course we can graft back to it. We've got another red oak. We've got hawthorn. See, they're tucked in everywhere. I keep finding ones that I've forgotten we planted. And then starting in this corner, we've got the beginnings of the outer skin just running along this, the northeastern edge. So that is another slow. Then there's, where are we? Hawthorn. I think there's another hawthorn, then a slow, and so on across. So old-fashioned hedging species that even when the leaves are down in winter, they're still fairly dense. They've got all sorts of wildlife benefits. And of course you can graft to them as well, so we can have a bit of diversity. Here we've got, what's that? That's a little elm. That's looking really well. That was brought on from seed. We've got another rowan. That's a very little one. See, I've missed the guard off that one as well. And then we've got more Italian alder, and there's a little run of these that goes across the bottom of the field here, just to go to full height really quick and give us cover, but they will eventually be killed out. And should we lose another one further up in the main run, where we've got them the other side of the house, we can come and get them from down here. We haven't got to buy another batch just to get one or two, because it's really expensive to buy just one or two trees. You know, if you buy them by 25 or 50 at a time, it's much cheaper. Hazel, because again we're going to want an understory. There's nothing in the centre here, below the crater garden here. There's nothing lower down because there's going to be a large earthwork going through here. But I'm trying to get the shelter belt established before we do that, just to get as much protection as possible. So there's another Cornelian cherry. Here's a currant that went in as a cutting about a year ago. Well, it's a fair sized cutting, but you know, that's a decent sized shrub. Now, here's an interesting story. According to the books, this is one of the most wind-fast conifers that you can grow. This is a radiata pine, but there's something about this site they just don't like. We lost half of them in the first year, then they seem to bounce back, the survivors, and seem to come on well, and they've just slowly died ever since. There we go, yeah, dead. So not everything takes. We won't be doing much more with that, but you got to try these things. So, see, there's little pine trees throughout to come through as an understory. So even though it's a full height tree, in the short term, as they come up and they approach 3 or 4 feet, I'm going to train them sideways by pegging them down, because pines are quite amenable to that, and as we take it sideways, it'll give a lot more low down protection until we can get things like Elaeagnus ebingi, or wax myrtle, or holly, or more of the evergreen stuff that we want as our final variety. The pines are just in there to get that going and jumpstart it a little bit and give us some protection. There's another Cornelian cherry. They seem to have done quite well. And so on. It's basically the same right across the field until we get up into that corner where we started. The difference being that there's going to be a lot more full height trees down here. So we've got things like monkey puzzle tree in the small nursery that we've got for bringing on our own stuff, because that again is a full height tree, really good nut variety. We've got a lot of hazels and a lot of chestnut to come out. There's the odd thing like this, like a beech. There's about half a dozen of these around across the bottom of the field here. I never find them all, but they're still doing quite well. Because the reason I'm doing this video now is because in a couple of weeks you'll barely be able to see some of these trees because the grass will be that high. But you can see what I mean by the pines. I mean, this was a desiccated husk about 6 months ago. Looked like it was going to die, and you can see how the new growth's coming on. It's really flying up. Really healthy. Very pleased with them. So they seem quite happy here. Whereas other pines of the same species don't seem to be doing quite so well. But you know, if you get them cheap enough and you plant them densely enough, it doesn't really matter, because the ones that will take will. It's very easy to look, especially when you're doing a big system. You know, you look at the books of which tree species are meant to do in your zone, and you work out which will do best where, and you lay it all out with, you know, the perfect amount of overlap between all of your trees and all the rest of it. Well, if one of them doesn't take, that's a big dent in your plans. So with a bigger system like this, you can afford to just put large volume things out and see what sticks, see what seems to do well, and you can, through those observations, that can guide what you'll do next. And these are really happy. So even though I was thinking we might think about culling these in a couple of years, there's a lot to be said for having a really healthy evergreen layer lower down. So I think I'll leave quite a few of these in. And they always look really attractive when they're planted in small clumps like this. I don't know, it's just aesthetics, but I like it. And if trees look happy and healthy together, there's usually a reason for it. So it's nice to emulate nature where you can. That's another, was that another cherry plant? I think we've got a lot of, no, sorry, bird cherry. Got a lot of bird cherry. Oh, hang on. Yeah, that's a failed cutting. I wonder what I was kicking. It's another beech. So that seems to be doing quite well. And there's another one down here. And beech, when it's young, I mean, they're very young trees, so it gets hammered in the winter. But when they go to a certain stage, but still aren't full height trees, they keep their leaves in winter, or tend to keep their leaves in winter. So again, that's virtually a form of evergreen cover because it's quite dense. Makes a lot of noise when it rattles in the window. So here's another one that's doing quite well. So it's going to be interesting seeing how things come along. Now this is a tree that we kept in a pot for years in the back garden. This was a free offer with toilet paper. Send off your wrappers and get a free tree in the post. We had 3, 1 survived, and this is it. So apparently this is meant to offset all them trees that are getting cut down for buying toilet paper. I'm not convinced, but yeah, nice to have a story with a tree. Stories. And here we've got, that seems to be hanging in. Look at that. That is a little juniper. But you can see they're that small and easy to miss. They're very slow growing as well, so they're not going to come up anytime soon. But they're very happy as an understory tree. So just got some canes in just to mark them. And even still, I keep finding canes and I haven't got a clue what the tree was. You know, if something's dead, you can't tell what it was. Like this one. Yeah, that was definitely a stick. Whereas that one I haven't marked. And that's a juniper that's failed. Doesn't matter, I put plenty of them in. We've got, again, you can see how many pine there are, quite a few. There's a currant, and I'm only pointing out a tiny fraction of the trees that are actually here. You know, they're very densely planted. And this winter, this next spring, all of this whole section is going to be overplanted with really dense willow, the same as the southeastern edge. In fact, that's where we're going to get the sign material from. So, horse chestnut. Got a couple of these. Now, horse chestnut's interesting because it's a natural source of saponins. So, while it's young, at least anyway, we can still get to the leaves. And yeah, you can use them as a soap alternative, and you can also extract it from the conkers as well. But it's a really quick biomass crop as well. We've got there. That I think is a plum cherry. I think cherry plum. Which way around is that? Then we've got a currant coming through. It's another beech, and so on. And we're virtually back to the corner. Let's see what else we've got. So you know everything's taken. There's quite a few failures as well. But a lot of these are apple cuttings. Just got put in the winter as fodder for the voles, basically. Because if they've got apple cuttings shoved in the ground, that's a nice pine tree. If they've got apple cuttings shoved in the ground that are living green wood, hopefully the idea was they'd leave the name cultivar stuff that we had guarded away alone. And it seems to have worked. But weirdly, some of the apples seems to have taken quite well. See, that was in the balance for a year or so. You can see it's just coming back strong this year. And we're not quite so dense in the plantings at this point. The pine seems quite good, and there's loads of currants, same as everywhere. But yeah, this is one of those areas. Oh, here we go. There's a cornelian cherry. That's just coming into leaf now. But this is one of those areas that will benefit from having a load of willow. Now from this point and around to there, we do have some willow. So it's a fairly narrow section that needs topping up. But yeah, that's the same as we've got at the top of the field there. So there's willow, another pine tree. There's willow. That is actually taking that one. Another beech. More willow, and so on. And then on the inside edge, in what will be an understory, one of the real stars here is the morello cherry. I mean, this is just coming to the end of blooming now, but we had 40-50 mile an hour winds. It just didn't care. We had snow. It didn't care. It still carried on flowering quite happily, looking really healthy. So we're going to do quite a bit more with morello as an understory, I suspect. Anyway, so there's the corner where we started out, and there's a view off to the south. So for most of the system, the species that have gone in have been fairly similar. As I say, I've pointed out that the bigger full height trees like, you know, oak and chestnut are going to go in along the northern edge, where we haven't got to worry about them casting shade over any structures or any food producing systems. Or animals, I suppose. But also we've all put things like chestnut through the rest of it, because they'll be in there just to be coppiced out and just for a pole crop, which is always useful. You know, you can't have too much firewood apart from anything else. But the rest of the system is fairly standard mix, and they've gone in fairly mixed up. It's things like rowan, chestnut, crabapple. What else we got? Cherry plum. There's a few of them. Cornelian cherry. We've had sea buckthorn. There's sloe, you know, blackthorn. There is a fair bit of hawthorn has gone in. Various pine species. Proper mix. There's the odd thing then, like there's a few honey locusts have gone in, just for a bit of variety. We're going to put more of them in elsewhere, but you get the idea. And that'll be added to as well over time. That's just the initial ones that went in, and some of them are coming up to about 4 or 5 feet now as individual plants. So with the willow coming up in big blocks around it, that'll encourage that to come up. And then moving forward, the willow seems to be doing very well this year, the cuttings that we put in. So that lot will get taken as cuttings at about waist height, everything above that, and that will go to create new blocks of willow along the bottom of the field on the northern edge, so that inside a couple of years we should be above head height, and you know, reasonably deep in terms of protection. And that's when we get things like the 3 swales that are higher up and this lower swale that's behind me, those with their rows of trees and shrubs on as well. They'll start coming up and they'll start giving their effect as well. So overall the whole site should start getting a little bit calmer in terms of wind. So yeah, that's a quick overview of our design for a good quality thick shelter belt that's got various yields for people and animals on a north facing, moderately, fairly windy site.